This week on Diabetes Connections, we're all supposed to know about ketones, but how much education did you actually get? I am sure we were told about this when my son was diagnosed, but honestly, I didn't even know why we were checking for many years. This week, I'm talking to Dr. Jennifer Sherr, a pediatric endocrinologist who lives with type 1, about the basics of ketones and a lot more. She shares best practices and what most people with diabetes really do to stay safe, and what she's hopeful for in terms of making ketone monitoring easier. We've been managing type 1 for 18 plus years, and I was surprised there was still a lot here I didn't know. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome back to Diabetes Connections. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and my Facebook feed is full of back-to-school questions and a lot of worried moms sending newer diagnosed kids. And I truly remember those days. My son was diagnosed at age 2, and he'd already had type 1 for almost 4 years by the time he went to kindergarten. And I think sending him to kindergarten was one of the scariest things, at least for me, in the whole diabetes journey, because I just, he's so young, even though he could do a bunch of his own management with supervision. Were they going to care about him? Were they going to pay attention to him? It's really different to send a little kid into other people's care with type 1. I mean, don't get me wrong. College was tough. Summer camp was tough. But kindergarten was really difficult for me. Of course, Benny couldn't wait, and he did great. Over the years, I've shared a lot about what I learned, the mistakes I made. And I am doing a back-to-school webinar with my friend Anna Sabino at Finding Smiles Coaching. That happens on August 19th at 8 p.m. It's a free webinar, of course. Register, and you will get the recording if for some reason you can't be there. But please be there because we're going to do a live Q&A, get your particular question answered. Anna, of course, is a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She's also a social worker. She also lives with type 1. I'm there for the mom-level advice. And this is specific to older kids. We're going to do this 6th grade and up, all the way to college. She's doing another webinar for parents of younger kids. You can find out more in the show notes. I'll link to the webinar that I'm doing and, of course, to Finding Smiles Coaching so you can get all the info for any kid of any age. I'm also going to link up more information about Mom's Night Out, Minneapolis and Phoenix coming up fast. Shout out to everybody who attended ADCES this past weekend in Phoenix. I'm hoping it's going to cool off by the time we get there in October, but I hope you had a great time. All the information about Mom's Night Out is available at diabetes-connections.com. Just click on the Events tab. I think that ketones is one of those topics that doctors think that somebody else has talked to you about, right? I don't think we had a good understanding of them until years into Benny's diagnosis. They did have us measuring them in the beginning, and you haven't lived until you've put cotton balls into your 2-year-old's diaper and then squeeze them out to test urine for ketones. Those were good times. Later on, we did get a blood ketone meter, and during the interview, you can hear my tip for saving money, not on the meter, but on the test strips that come with it. There's been a lot of talk lately about a continuous glucose monitor and a ketone monitor in one sensor. Abbott got breakthrough device designation from the FDA this year for their model. It's the same size as their Freestyle Libre 3. A couple of pump companies have already signed up to integrate that system. Sounds like the same type of hardware as the Freestyle Libre 3, but there's really not a lot of information out about that yet. And to be frank, we're not going to get to that today. We talk about it, but full disclosure, we talk about it in the sense of what would you like to see, not what has Abbott released yet. And of course, I will be following up on that when Abbott has more information. But my guest this week is Dr. Jennifer Sherr. She is an assistant professor of pediatrics endocrinology at Yale. She's a peds endo who cares for patients. She serves on the Type 1 Diabetes Exchange Steering Committee, and she lives with type 1 diabetes herself. I thought it'd be great to talk to somebody who walks the walk here, because while she gives advice about measuring for ketones, when to check, how to check, that sort of thing, she also shares how she does it herself. And she's very realistic about this kind of thing. Our conversation right after this. When I think about our family's use of CGM and Dexcom, it's getting harder and harder to remember how we did things before. I mean, how did we manage when Benny needed something like 10 finger sticks a day when he was a toddler? We thought it was amazing to switch to Dexcom CGM when it needed to be calibrated twice a day. Remember that? Now, Dexcom G6 eliminates finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. We love the alerts and alarms, and that we can change them both for him and for us. A lot has changed as Benny has grown from a toddler with type 1 to a college student. Dexcom Share and Follow has let us help give him more and more independence. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Dr. Sherr, welcome to Diabetes Connections. I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic that I don't think we've ever done a complete episode about. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Before we jump in, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself? You were diagnosed with type 1 at 9. What do you remember about that?
I remember a lot, and it was many, many years ago. So let's just acknowledge that. But I remember having increased thirst, urination. My mom was a clinical research nurse. I think she knew all the signs. I think she didn't want me to have diabetes.
Yeah.
And so, I remember the night before going to the hospital, it was a Sunday night in July. And I said, something's wrong. I can't get out of the bathroom. And the next morning I went to the pediatrician and they said she has diabetes. And I went straight to the hospital and I was there for a week because we did things differently back then, right? And I'm amazed at all we've seen develop over the years and how we're learning so much more about how to treat this condition, how to unburden people living with a condition. So I feel like I'm in a great field at a great time, but hoping one day to be put out of a job.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Right?
So when I think of ketones, I laugh, and I'll tell you why. So my son was diagnosed at 23 months. And for those first couple of months, and probably, I don't know, for longer than that, I don't know if we didn't have ketone meters or I just didn't have one, but we literally would put cotton balls into his diapers and then wring them out onto a stick and see what the color was. I mean, I can't be the only person who did that, I'm sure. You've worked with patients who've had to do that?
Yes. And so it's such a struggle, right? If you think about it, we have methods to monitor ketones, but not everything is always covered. It's one of the things that I really get impassioned about. Like, we need tools. We need coverage for tools. And so I do have, parents of toddlers who I'm telling them to do the cotton ball method. And it just feels awful, but we do what we can. And what's amazing? The resilience of parents to find the data we need and get us, what we need to do. And I think we can go ahead and optimize treatment based on the information we gather.
Yeah. Well, hey, we got through it.
Yeah.
So we probably should start by talking about what ketones are, why we're checking for them. How do you talk to patients about this?
Yeah, I think when we think about ketones, the biggest thing to know is that it's the body's alternate source of fuel. And so, most of the time we're relying on the glucose we're eating, and our body's going to use that. But, if we think back to prehistoric days and, people are fasting and there's a period of time where they can't go ahead and find glucose, they're going to go ahead and convert into using these ketone bodies to provide their brain and their muscles the energy they needed. Now, it's really helpful in many situations, but for people with diabetes, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because we have insulin insufficiency, insulin deficiency, so we can't balance things out. And because of this, ketone bodies develop, and then acidosis can ensue. As our blood becomes more acidic, we run the risk of diabetic ketoacidosis, which entails having high glucose levels or a prior history of diabetes, a low pH that indicates your body has acid, and the presence of ketones. And when we think about diabetes and acute complications that can be associated with the condition, there's severe hypoglycemia, which we all talk about. We've got our glucagon ready to go. And there's diabetic ketoacidosis. So they're the two most common things we're talking to people about. And the reason is because we know it is an ever-present situation that we may face. So just like we're prepared with glucagon, we want to be prepared on the converse side and have ketone monitoring available.
It may seem obvious, but I remember learning about this when my son was younger and honestly thinking, why am I measuring this? What is dangerous about it? I think low blood sugar we kind of get because we can see it. But what is dangerous? And DKA, I know we all know is an emergency, but why?
Yeah, no, that's great. So I think the thing about it is, as your body is getting more acidotic, you're trying to get rid of some of the extra acid. So the way our body may do it, we will experience nausea, we'll experience vomiting. It will be like, I can't stop vomiting. I'm vomiting bile. It's green in appearance, right? Like, I just can't stop. I'm extremely dehydrated. Now, if this condition continues, right, people can go ahead and have altered mental status. They can experience, continued just decline in their overall status. And so we don't want to see youth come in with severe presentation. I do a lot of management at home. Kids call in, I've got ketones. Okay, we're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3. I don't want you to go to the ER. So it's all about keeping people safe at home and recognizing there's telltale signs or situations where we're going to encourage people to be checking for ketones so we can go ahead and start our DKA mitigation plan.
I think most of us associate or have, I hate to say it, maybe experienced DKA in diagnosis.
Yep.
And hopefully, knock on wood, not too much after that. But can we start from there, which seems to be the most emergency that at least I've encountered among the people that I know is DKA at diagnosis?
Yeah. And so, DKA at diagnosis really depends on, people going ahead and not recognizing potentially the symptoms. And so, you're presenting a little further along the spectrum. And because of this, now those symptoms are really calling at you.
Yeah.
I've got nausea, I got vomiting. I need immediate assistance. And so you're right. There's many youth who present with new onset diabetes and DKA. We try to talk to primary care providers. We also engage with school nurses in our area because they've got eyes on kids all the time. And so if they see a child who is peeing more or drinking more, let's get them in early. So definitely, that risk of having DKA at presentation, but it can come up throughout the period of living with diabetes. When I think about it, some of the things that we may see the development of ketones with are going to be things like somebody thinks they just have an illness. I've got a GI bug. I'm vomiting. It's probably just that. Well, turns out it's not that. My infusion set has a failure. There's a different reason. So sometimes we're thinking it's just a common thing that's happening to my child, normal childhood stuff. But for youth with diabetes, for adults with diabetes, we always have to keep in the back of our mind, is ketones leading to the symptoms they're experiencing? And so I think that guidelines say that we should be talking about DKA at diagnosis at least annually and opportunistically. So if somebody comes in and they've had an episode of DKA, I want to go ahead and problem solve, figure out what may have caused it, and give them the tools to avoid it in the future. And I'll share with you, I feel like I am definitely a ketone measurer. I practice what I preach, right? But I have had an episode of DKA. My last episode of DKA was in medical school. It was during exams. I was sick. I was stressed out. And I knew it was happening. And I was living with my parents at the time. And they came home and I was vomiting. And I was like, I need help. Like, we can't do this anymore. And we went to the hospital for intervention. But it's just that culmination of you don't know when all the symptoms, all the factors are going to sort of cross each other and really cause increased acidosis and the potential for a very risky complication.
I don't know if you can answer this, so I'll throw it out there. So one of the things that I've talked about just with friends and parents of kids with type 1 is it seems like some people may be more susceptible. My son could be over 300 for a while or a day. Like, we've had issues, as one does, and no ketones or very small. And I have a friend whose son, he hits 250 for an hour and he's thrown off medium ketones, and they've had more problems than we have. It really does affect people differently. I'm not imagining that.
I definitely think there's a spectrum in terms of how people experience ketones. I am one of those, I'm like your friend's child, where I am a ketone producer, right? Like, it is going to happen. It's going to happen to me, and it's going to happen quickly. In the end, one of the things that I think is hard to think about is sometimes I hear from folks, oh, well, I haven't had ketones in the past. I probably don't have them in the future. And especially in teenagers, it's the age where we're invincible. Like, I've got this figured out. I'm doing pretty good. I don't want to check. I still encourage people, although you may be that individual who rarely experiences ketones,
right?
When those thresholds are met, check it. It's just going to give you peace of mind that we're good to go. So I do appreciate there is this spectrum, but I think still just getting that reassurance, that tap on the head, keep going, you're on the right path, is so critical.
How do you get rid of them? Can you talk a little bit about that, what you do once you've got them?
Absolutely. So I would really recommend that each individual living with diabetes speak to their provider about having a DKA mitigation plan. Really, what the whole crux of it is going to be is giving more insulin. Ketones are a sign that our body is insulin deficient. So going ahead and giving more insulin for somebody who is on an automated insulin delivery system or a pump, we're going to be thinking about, did that infusion set fail? So I don't want to just keep bolusing through the site that I have in. I've got to make sure I'm changing that site, that the insulin is definitely getting through. And it's surprising how much insulin it can take to go ahead and clear ketones out. We have a whole DKA mitigation plan that is generated at the end of every clinic visit in our clinic. And the reason for that is kids grow, insulin doses change. And so what we would recommend doing is also going to change because the dose of insulin provided may be higher as your insulin requirements are increasing. So the crux of our plan is insulin, but then it's also fluids. I want to go ahead and flush everything out. And you're often mildly dehydrated. So we are very prescriptive of drink this much fluid to help you feel better and get the ketones out of your system.
It's that insulin part that I think people kind of forget about, right?
Yes.
Because you need fluids to get rid of the ketones, but at the same time, if there's nothing, well, at the same time, you need insulin, but I'll let you talk about this, but it has always been in my experience that it's confusing in that, you know, if you're pushing insulin, you need carbs.
Yes, absolutely. And so we have situations where people can have glucose levels that are in a normal range and ketones are developing. But in order to stop the production of ketones, we have to give insulin. That's going to be the signal. Shut off using this alternate fuel source. Go back to using the glucose that's available in your body. But now we realize, okay, well, blood sugar is 125. What do I do in this situation? I've got ketones. Yes, I need to be ingesting carbs to combat the insulin that I need to take in order to clear those ketones.
It can be kind of confusing, though, if your blood sugar is okay. So I always, and you know, you can jump in here and tell me if this is okay to recommend, but like, you know, full sugar popsicles, full sugar ginger ale. If a kid's sick and has ketones, it's so hard to get him to eat something. Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod.
Did you hear the pod drop?
Did you know all the sounds used to make that song come from a site change with the Omnipod 5 automated insulin delivery system? Pretty cool, huh? With Omnipod 5, pump site changes are simple. The pod lasts up to 3 days, 72 hours, and to change it, you just fill up the pod with insulin, place it on your body, tap a few buttons in the Omnipod 5 app, and you're ready to go. There's no tubing to prime like with traditional insulin pumps, and it's virtually pain-free. So you never have to see or handle the insertion needle. Want to try Omnipod 5 for yourself? Request a free Omnipod 5 starter kit today by visiting omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Terms and conditions apply. Eligibility may vary.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's exactly what we would say to do. You know, we're going to say, you know, take out the Gatorade, right? Have Pedialyte. Have a full sugar popsicle. Those are absolutely the things that are going to allow you to get fluids down. And it's sort of like, you know, in my training to become a pediatrician before I subspecialized in pediatric endocrinology, when a child's vomiting, it's really hard to get them to drink fluids, right? And so we would always say to families, you know, it doesn't work as much in the days of streaming services, but I used to say back in the day, each commercial break, give a few ounces, right? And now I have to be like, every 15 minutes, if we're watching SpongeBob and it's a 15-minute episode,
right?
Go ahead and check at that point or midway through a show because, you know, a lot of times when kids are not feeling well, they're on the couch, they're looking for comfort, you're next to their side. And so as the parent, we can be prompting them, take a small sip, don't chug it all down because then the whole cycle of vomiting is going to initiate again, especially if it's truly the fact that the whole family has gastroenteritis. I wish having diabetes protected us from gastroenteritis. Turns out it's not the case. We just have to be mindful of the fact that it's going to take a lot more steps as we're battling an underlying viral illness.
When is it time to go to the hospital for, at the very least, fluids? Because sometimes you just cannot do it at home.
Absolutely. I always feel like when I'm talking to families, people call in, and sometimes I hear families basically asking for permission. Whenever anybody is thinking about it, I'm going to send you, right? I want you to feel comfortable, right? So that's number one. But if you've had multiple episodes of vomiting, if your child has no urine output, if your child is crying, they don't have tears, if you have a situation where you press down on a fingertip and you see that the time it takes for your fingertip to get red again is slow, generally I would say I want it to refill in 2 seconds. If it's not refilling, it's a sign I need a lot more fluids. And so it's a quick thing that I can say, okay, let's check all of this stuff out. And then I've also wanted to assess in some situations whether or not a child has altered mental status, right? And so they may be with an alternate care provider, somebody who's not as familiar with diabetes. And I will say, put me on speakerphone and I will talk directly to the child, because in the end, that can guide me so much. And you don't want to scare this, maybe it's a camp counselor, maybe it's a grandparent who is giving mom and dad a night out, and we need those, right? But at the same time, how can we gather the information we need to, really assessing hydration status, looking at frequency of vomiting, and hearing how the child or the adult with diabetes is thinking and able to respond to somebody.
I just had to laugh, Jennifer, because of course, when you talked about the fingertip, I had to go press mine. I bet if people listen, they did that too. I was curious, like, I've never done that before. I wonder how long it takes.
And meanwhile, I'm like, I know I'm dehydrated after clinic this morning, and I'm like, mine's slow. So
I'm good. I've got my giant cup of tea and my giant thing of water. I mean, I'm ridiculous over here, but, oh boy. One of the things that confused us when my son was younger was the advice about not exercising when your blood sugar was above a certain level. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, no. And I mean, it's one of those things where we don't know what we don't know, right? And so we used to give that advice. If your blood sugar is high, oh my gosh, you better not exercise because that might cause, further issues. I was actually just part of a consensus group that was an international organization, exercise physiologists, pediatric endocrinologists, adult endocrinologists, a whole group of people. And we're specifically talking about automated insulin delivery and exercise. How do we approach that? And I'm so pleased to be part of the guidelines. They're very practical. You can find them online. I can send you a link if that would be at all helpful.
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes.
That would be great. But the thing we say in that is if your blood sugar is high heading into exercise, check for ketones. If you don't have ketones, go ahead and exercise. It's not a matter of I've exceeded this glucose threshold. The question really is, going back again, is my infusion set failing? Am I going into something where I'm now going to disconnect, or I may not be getting as much insulin, or I'm going to be battling? I was in clinic this morning talking to a kid about the football season's going to start. Every single time he gets on the field, his glucose shoots up. You know why? Because there's adrenaline associated. So if I have ketones present, that's a time I don't want to exercise. That's a time I want to problem solve and think about, this is not going to be the best. High glucose, go ahead. As long as you're feeling up to it, I think it's fine to go ahead and exercise.
Yeah, because especially when my son was little, we were like, well, the exercise is going to bring it down.
Yeah.
But why are ketones dangerous when you're exercising?
Well, there's a number of factors. I think that number one, you may remove your pump if you're on a pump. You may be reducing insulin doses. You may be doing additional feedings because you're thinking, I have this risk of running low now. And all of those things are going to further compound the hyperglycemia. We're going to continue to develop ketonemia because of the fact that there's insulin deficiency. Then there's the other side of things. The way our bodies are set up. Let's say I'm not a marathon runner, obviously, but if I were to run a marathon or if I were doing prolonged activity, eventually my body is going to look to an alternate source of fuel unless I'm taking little bits as I'm going along. And so if it's a really long, kids have football sessions. I always hear about high school 2-a-days and they're going and right. And it's a lot. And so we're thinking about how long are you going to be exposed to the potential to be without insulin, have higher levels, and then have a normal physiological response to I am fasting, let me use an alternate fuel source that may cause ketone development. In some situations, for people who do not have diabetes, ketone development during exercise could be a very beneficial thing. People with diabetes, not so much. We don't want to stand on a tightrope without a safety net. We want to know that, and diabetes is all, right? I mean, it's a roller coaster, it's a standing on a tightrope, but it's using the tools we have to build that safety net underneath us and provide everything so we can balance as best possible.
This may be what you have just referred to, but I'm going to give you my layperson question too about it. I always thought it was something to do with lactic acid as well during exercise, because that's a lot of acid.
You do develop lactic acid during exercise, absolutely. And interestingly enough, people are trying to figure out, can we look at lactic acid levels to tell us about exercise, right? And when exercise is starting. But lactic acid and ketone bodies are two separate things. So both will lead to acidosis. It's just a completely different pathway, if that makes sense.
It does. I just, in my brain 15 years ago, I was always worried if he's got lactic acid and he's got ketones, that's a lot of acid in the blood, and it's just creating a scary and dangerous environment. But they're separate, not something to really be, to be concerned about each differently.
Yes, I think in the end, we're going to definitely focus in on those ketone levels to guide us as to what we should be doing. I think lactic acid buildup is a natural response to the strenuous activity we're doing, right? We almost want that. It's showing us that we're reaching certain levels. So in the end, I'm less concerned about that. I want eyes on my ketone status.
Got it. Speaking of which, let's talk about the strips versus the blood meter. Both work. They're different. One is more exact. Give me your take on the strips. How should people use those? What are you looking for? How do you read them?
So, and by strips, we're talking urine ketone strips.
Yes.
And I just like to clarify, in order to use them, very easy, you're going to run to the bathroom. You can pee on the strip. Somebody can go ahead and get a cup, get that measurement. You're going to dip it real quick, wait 15 seconds, and then we've got a color chart. And I always say it's sort of like that pinkish tan to like really deep purple, right? And it's a spectrum. And I think one of the things that can be daunting is, well, I'm not really sure which box it lines up with. It's okay. Just give me something close. In the day of FaceTime and Zoom, I will go ahead and say, let's jump on a Zoom. I will help you read this strip, because in the end, it's helpful. The way you think about it is that the urinary ketone strips, you're going to get 50 in a bottle. They're relatively cheap. I'm going to have them around. They're sitting in my bathroom right now. I keep them on my windowsill, which is right next to where they need to be used, right? But the problem with them is that they do not like being in humid environments. Guess what my bathroom is? A humid environment, right? But in the end, I'm going to relish in the fact that I'm gathering more information and potentially using alternate testing, being the blood ketone testing if I need to. So in the end, I think urinary strips are a great way to get some assessment. The other thing to know about urinary strips, and I apologize that I didn't say this first, because it's probably one of the most important things to know, is they are measuring acetoacetic acid. And that's the final breakdown product when we are making ketones. So the major ketone body in DKA is beta hydroxybutyrate. So we want to be tracking that ketone body. As we go ahead and clear, things are going to go ahead and change different form, go to acetoacetic acid. It's going to collect in my bladder. I now have to flush it all out. Because of the fact that it's that final step, it may not give us true eyes on what's happening in our body right now. Mm-hmm. It's sort of telling me the story of the past, right? So I do caution that it's better to have a measure, but it's not the most precise measure.
Okay, and before we talk about the meter, I got to tell you, thinking back to those cotton balls, when my son got old enough and figured out how to pee in a cup and on the strips, this was like a party. It was like a circus trick for him. He was so excited he could do this. So, boy, that just jogged my memory. It was so funny, Jennifer. But yes, then we have the meter, much more accurate. Tell us about how that works, because it's measuring blood. It's not measuring urine.
Yes. So it's a capillary fingerstick measure. And what we're measuring this time is beta hydroxybutyrate, and that is our predominant ketone body. What I also like is it's giving discrete values. So it's going to say, I'm 0.2, I am 1.7. And that's going to provide much more information. Now, one of the things I think is really crucial is to let folks know when we're doing capillary measures, under 0.6 is normal. Because sometimes people are like, I measured something. Measuring something isn't bad. There's going to be a little bit of ketones around. And so I think, the drawbacks of the blood fingerstick measures, the strips are more expensive. I recently got mine refilled at my doctor's, and I ended up with a $90 copay, even though it's covered. They have a shorter expiration date, so I may need to be thinking about changing them out more frequently. And then I think in the day and age where so many of us are using continuous glucose monitors, you don't always have a backup fingerstick glucose meter. And so before it was like, oh, no big deal. Like, I'm going to check my blood. If I'm going to test my blood, I'm going to get another drop of blood, throw it on this strip. I think there's almost some hesitation now about, oh, do I really need to poke my finger? In this situation, yes, it would be very helpful to poke your finger. We're not going to ask for it a lot, but it could really make a difference in our next steps in terms of management.
Don't listen to this, Jennifer. This is not a doctor thing. I thought you were literally going to take your headphone out for a second. No, this is like, I'm just laying down that this is a layman thing. As you listen, one of the things that we do and have done in my local moms group is buying the meter itself is pretty inexpensive. It's like a printer with ink, right? Buying the strips is the expensive part. We all split it up. So I might have 10 strips, right? So then we can all use it because they do expire pretty quickly.
Yes.
So I'm glad you're agreeing, but I was going to say like that's an unofficial thing.
No,
but,
in the end, here's my take on everything. I, in my provider role, need to tell you the way that is, this is the way we should do it. In my person with diabetes role, in the role of somebody who cares about folks with diabetes, as long as we have supplies, I think it's great, get it done. I'm glad that you're all talking about ketone measurement. You're all engaging with it and finding a path forward. So I think it's excellent.
Okay, great. Because it really does help. I mean, we don't use them like we used to use blood meter strips. They're not,
exactly.
They can sit in a drawer for a little while. You mentioned the possibility, you mentioned CGM, and there's a lot of talk right now about the possibility of measuring ketones. I'm not going to ask specifically about that because we haven't seen the hardware. There's not a ton of information out there except that it's coming, which is very exciting. But I would ask, how significant do you think that is going to be for patients? It seems like, I don't know, it's hard for me to picture it, but it seems like it could really be helpful.
Yeah, I think that when I think about the potential for future technology and how it can impact things, I really think back to how people are engaging with ketone management today, right? When I talk to people, I find out that, there's studies that show 30 to 40% of people don't even have ketone measurement capabilities at home right now, right? So I'm talking to them about it and we're not even set up to test. Even though I'm counseling on ketone testing, people will call in and say, my child's vomiting. I'm like, okay, did you check for ketones? And there's no judgment when I ask, but I'm hoping that we're instilling this sense of my next step. My child's sick, glucose levels are high. Let me get that ketone measure. So I want to build the confidence. So wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to rely on us always prompting something? Yeah. I think that's really what's going to be very beneficial. But in the end, I think it's more about how do we use the tools right now that we have? Because they exist, but they are so suboptimally engaged with. I spend a lot of time on my intake questionnaires. I have a specific question that says, have you had ketones since your last visit? Yes, no. The next question says, do you have ketone strips? Yes, no. Because, I realize all these people are telling me, oh, I don't have ketones. And then I realized I was missing the point that they don't even have a way to measure.
Yeah.
And right. And I find, at least in my practice, if I can focus talking about one individual thing at different time points in the school year, and I say school year just because, again, I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, but when we talk about heading into the school year, I'm working on school forms, but then I'm saying, hey, by the way, I really would recommend the flu shot. And by the way, if you get sick, I'm always going to recommend assessing for ketones. Hey, let's go ahead and renew that prescription for you. So finding ways to have that conversation. And I love when parents come in and say, or teenagers, young adults, and say, I need my ketone strips refilled. That's great.
A+. As you said, you're pediatric endo. You're an adult with type 1. This is an issue for adults. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot, but I do want to acknowledge that I would think everything we talked about today could be applicable for adults as well.
Absolutely. Adults get sick. Your kids get sick. You're going to end up with the illness they carried home to you. We have the same issues with infusion set failures. It's the same regardless of where the age spectrum is. If I'm living with diabetes, I need to be thinking about ketone monitoring. The difference is, it's funny, as a child, my parent is prompting me. As an adult in my house, if I'm not acting like myself, my family will ask me to check in on my blood sugar and they'll tell me to check in on my ketones because they know when things go off the rails, I'm not exactly my usual self. And so I take it as a sign of love that they're like, okay, let's just check in. This is not diabetes. I can be angry, right? But it's not diabetes related. So I do think adults should be keeping this in back of mind. And there's a lot of reasons to check persistently high blood sugars. I'm sick. I think anytime you're sick, just check. And if I vomit, just go ahead and check. I could have food poisoning, but I want to make sure it's not just that I'm falsely lulled into the sense that I just have food poisoning.
Yeah, just. But also you're a good person, because if my family, I don't have diabetes, and I know if my husband was like, "You're cranky, is it diabetes?" I'd be like, I'll show you cranky.
Yeah, it took some time and it took some introspection, but you know what? We came there. So, and they're great. You know what I love about it is that I'll be very honest. My family will then come up and they bring me a 2-liter pitcher and they make sure that I have something that I'm going to watch. And they're like, okay, it's mom's time to just sit back. So in a way, while I realize it can sound judgy, they're there to help. And I think that's what that moment of, recognizing the good in what they're trying to do.
That's amazing. I love it so much. Hey, before I let you go, you talked about being diagnosed at 9. When did you decide to become an endocrinologist?
9.
For real?
Yes. I went home from the hospital asking how to spell pediatric endocrinology.
Come on.
No, I swear to God. I would have friends come to the house and say, do you want to come out and play? And I'd be like, I'm working on a scholarship because I need to go to medical school. And my mom was like, you are a very weird child, right? In the end, I did everything. I enjoyed life, but I was very adamant that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And I'm so grateful I get to be in this role. And I'm just so grateful that I've seen so many changes. I'll tell you, when I was diagnosed, I was on purified pork insulin.
Yeah.
Right. I was on insulins that we don't even talk about today. Right. And so I look back to color changing strips that, my blood sugar is probably around here, to where we are today. I'm amazed. And I get to, in my other hat of doing research studies, I get to be part of a lot of this. And I'm just so excited for what the future holds. And I truly am excited for my colleagues who work on the converse side of things, that we're just going to cure diabetes, right? So I am super eager for that, but this has been a life calling for me.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for the great info.
Thank you so much, Stacey. This was a true pleasure.
More information on everything we talked about, you can find that at diabetes-connections.com. Click on the episode homepage. You know by now that every episode has its own homepage over at the website. But if you're new around here, every episode has its own page over at the website. And that's the case for all of our episodes. This is episode 737. There's a lot of pages. We do have a very robust search. You can go to the upper right-hand side and put in whatever keyword you want to learn more about. I got to tell you, though, a couple of weird website things have been happening lately, especially to the older episodes. If you get to an episode with no podcast player or something that looks like it has a huge code instead of a player, please email me. We are going back into the back catalog to fix all of that. But it's really helpful if you find any mistakes in there to let me know, because I really want this podcast to stand the test of time. Going back to 2015, there's a lot of really interesting information, in my opinion, about the evolution of a lot of this stuff. And if you go back, let me know what you think. Let me know what you want to hear more about. Let me know what's missing. I can't believe we've done all these episodes and never one just focusing on ketones. What else? Please let me know. Thanks to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.